today we have a guest. I met Jane Epstein, who's about to come out here. I met her in Clubhouse, and I recognize that this might be a topic as advertised when you talk about like childhood trauma or sexual abuse and things like that, which I find extremely fascinating.
Great morning, world! Welcome to the Rise Up with Dragon podcast with your host, Dragon!
Great morning, world. Got this yellow hat on. For those of you that are in Clubhouse, you can't see it, but if you want to see it, you can go watch it on the lives. You know that I'm into hats. I love hats. It's part of my new reality as Dragon, where I'm constantly, this is one of the reasons why I run my podcast like this as well. And I do lives and stream it into YouTube and Facebook and LinkedIn and all that stuff. And a little secret, the reason why I do that is not to gain popularity. It's to ensure my discomfort. Because, if you've heard my story before, I used to suffer dramatically from things like anxiety and things like that. So I actually push myself into the uncomfortable, and it's progressively over the years, 10 or 12 years that I've been doing this. It's not that big of a deal now, to the point where I wear yellow hats. And this is my shirt. That's going to be my TED Talk. It's going to be called which is going to make people go, huh? When they hear that. But anyway, great morning. You'll notice that my hat matches my shirt on the bottom. So thank you to the person that gave me this hat. I love it. So great morning, world. Today is a really, really cool, unique opportunity. Usually I love, in my podcast, I do have guests often, but I love to rock solo. But today we have a guest, and the place that I met this person, what I love is people that have an amazing stories, and you're about to hear an amazing story. But I love two other things. One is I love the way that I meet them. I love to meet people in unique ways, like, oh, I wonder why I met that person. So I met Jane Epstein, who's about to come out here. I met her in Clubhouse, and I see some of our friends are joining us in Clubhouse. And I recognize that this might be a topic as advertised when you talk about like childhood trauma or sexual abuse and things like that, which I find extremely fascinating. We might not see a lot of people saying, I would like to talk to Jane about my, childhood trauma. So I would assume most people would reach out to Jane after. And what's really funny is if you go to her website, and we'll talk about it later, it's called Complicated Courage. Isn't courage complicated? Isn't our past and everything that we've done complicated? So anyway, I met her, and I loved the way I met her. And then when I spoke to her and I heard her story, which is an amazing story, it was very, very much in tune with the work that I do. Because as you know, all the work that I do in the interface response system is about helping equip people, arm people with some knowledge, but also this more efficient, more effective response system so that you don't get off track once you set goals in life. And a big part of that is our programming. And a lot of us have unconsciously been programmed by some stuff that's happened. So when I heard Jane's story and I heard her willingness to speak out loud about something that most people have quieted down, one of the things that I noticed in my journey is that I've actually managed to take certain things that happened to me, right, before I learned that how they happened for me. I actually learned how to take them and quiet them down enough and for a long enough time that I actually stopped thinking that they actually happened. So I think there's a lot of people out there, especially in the realm of this conversation. So what Jane does so beautifully is she makes it okay to talk about something. So it's potentially a little controversial for others, but you're just gonna love her, and you're gonna love her story. So I'm gonna bring her out, and Here she is, Jane Epstein. Hey, Jane.
Hey, good morning. Great morning.
So everybody, when they come on my show, I'm realizing now that I almost look like some sort of like an Asian kung fu master with this hat on. So, but I like it. It gives me that power. So Jane, a lot of people want to know if they should call me like Dragon or Dr. JC. So you get to do whatever you want, right? Just get that out of the way. But thanks so much for coming on the show. I'm really excited about this conversation. Jane's also in our clubhouse room. We don't see as many people in there as typical, but nobody's going to be put on the spot, and you can just listen if you want. But naturally, you'll be able to reach out to Jane after. So Jane, I kind of teed us up, and I think the best thing to do would be to just let you cut loose a little bit and share your story so that we can start to, like at the end of the story, which would be now, I have some questions about it and stuff. So take it away. Let everybody know a little bit more about you. You're an advocate for people now, but you've got a miraculous story. So take us through it.
Great. Thank you, Dragon. Thank you. First of all, thank you for offering me this platform. I appreciate that. And thank you to the listeners, to anybody who's listening. I know it takes courage, and this is a lot. I'm going to give a care warning. This does involve sibling sexual abuse. I think the best way to share my story is kind of the way it unfolded for me, because for me, I figured out that my life really happened out of order, and I couldn't process it until I put it back in order. One day, this is where I'm going to start, I found myself at the bottom of the staircase, and I was holding my 8-year-old son's hand, and I was looking into his eyes, and I felt like a failure. I wanted to die. I wanted to leave this world. Now, I was not suicidal, but I wanted an act of God or something to take me out. And I had a moment of reflection as he trotted away into the playroom, and I thought, I can't do this to my kids. And at that point, I had been in therapy for years. I had been on antidepressants, and I still could not be happy. And yet I'm a stay-at-home mom in the suburbs, 2 kids, husband. Life should be amazing. And I realized there's something inside of me. And that was hard to admit, that there was something inside of me that needed fixing, not the outside world and not my husband. But I took a deep breath. And at that moment, I decided consciously that I would start writing my story down, and I would give up alcohol. And that's where the healing began. And that's when I could start from the beginning. And the beginning was I was sexually abused by my older brother from age 6 to 12. And at the time, I thought it's just 2 kids being curious. It's not that big a deal. I didn't understand the ramifications that it would have later in life. Of course, I was 6, right? What do you know at 6? And then when he left for college, I was left with this feeling of needing sexual contact because my body had been trained. My body reacted the way it was supposed to. And I didn't know what to do. And so I became very focused on boys, and I needed boys. I needed attention all the time. And I became very promiscuous. And in fact, I almost barely graduated from high school. I started doing drugs. I started drinking. And I was very numb inside. I was very distant. I became rebellious. Now, all these things appeared normal because my parents were going through a divorce. And as a parent, you think, oh, they're just acting out. She doesn't have a great relationship with her father. She's unhappy. So I didn't show any outward signs of sexual abuse. And then I barely graduated high school, and then I started business college. But there was a draw. There was something inside of me. I wanted to become a stripper. I'm not sure where that came from. This is probably a whole nother segment. We probably need a psychologist for that. But I was drawn to the world of stripping, and I wanted to do it. And I decided to go audition, and I did a couple shots illegally. I was 18. And I got up on that stage, and I started putting one shaky foot in front of the other, praying that I wouldn't fall off the stage. But I found power. There were men, and they were tipping me, and they were telling me I was pretty, and I felt the power, and I felt the control. And it was actually, in a way, quite healing, because I learned how to talk to men, and I learned how to feel pretty. But that's also where I met my first husband. He came up to me, and he tipped me, and he said, "What are you doing here? You look like the kind of girl that I could take home to my mom." And he had been in the club before, and I'd had my eyes on him, but he always tipped me and left. So I took that opening and I said, "You running back out." And I met him at the bar. And I knew at that moment I had a love at first sight moment. I knew we were going to get married. He was older, he was wiser, he was funny. I have no problem saying this, but he rescued me. He took me off the stage, got me back in school, helped me study, taught me how to dress, taught me how to talk to people, taught me how to socialize. And it wasn't a perfect marriage because then I started working more and more hours and he started working fewer hours. So I started supporting the relationship. So I was starting to go into a little bit of a depression and resentment. And that's when we got the news that he was diagnosed with terminal cancer. And through that grief process, I found joy. And I know that's very confusing to people at first. But when he died, I felt alive for the first time because I had been numb inside. And when he died, I didn't have any choice but to feel. And I was alive. And I was grateful for my experience of being able to grow through that process. Now, after he died, I was independent, had my own job, and that's when I met my now husband. And we had 2 beautiful children. And that's when the memories came back of the sexual abuse. And that's when the volatility came back. That's when the depression came in. But I still didn't know why. I thought, well, I'm a new mom. It's my late husband. It's my new marriage. It's tricky. It's tough. It's unhappy. That's what it is. So I had to go through that. And I didn't tell anybody how depressed I was until I finally hit bottom and I had to figure it out. So that's the short version of my story.
So pretty amazing. There's so many different things about it. Now, first of all, congratulations on somehow finding your way. I mean, it's one thing to tell your story, but most people that have been through something like that I come across, tell that story from the stance of a victim, right? But what's amazing to me is that you found a way to, like we said, and we advertised, turn your mess into your message. So I just want to point out, there's a very big difference between somebody that tells a story and basically says, and that's why I'm so fucked up now, rather than saying, that's what's brought me to this place now. So before I get into my particular questions, because what I like to do is I like to pick apart the timeline and ask you questions about it. Because throughout our life, whenever we perceive that things happen to us, typically we're unconscious to what's actually happening, because it's all that stuff that you just shared has led us here. And I think even if somebody has never been through abuse like that or never taken the stage and wiggled their feet as a stripper, I think they can all probably say it makes sense because of the way you explained it. But just hit right now, give us a little bit of some facts and some statistics about, because one of the things when we have experienced trauma, one of the things that I notice is that people think that it makes them abnormal. Give us some facts and some statistics that you know about spousal sexual abuse and sexual abuse, with children, because it's a lot more common. When I met you, it wasn't really something I was conscious to. Like, it was like one of those things that I knew about, but I didn't know it was like a thing. I thought it was a thing that just happened with like just crazy people or something like that.
Right.
Know? So tell us, what's the reality of how often that's happening? Is it happening more these days or less? All that. Give us a little bit of that knowledge.
I appreciate you asking that question because it is very, very prevalent. And when I talk about sibling sexual abuse, I'm including siblings, step siblings, cousins, older adolescents. So think the older your child's best friend's older brother or sister, older babysitters. So child with child sexual abuse accounts for almost 40% of sexual abuse. And it is on the rise because the access to pornography, children see something on the screen and their head says, oh, this, I shouldn't be looking at this. but then their body reacts and it feels good. So then they might seek out a younger sibling or a younger cousin to act out those types of things. So it's very prevalent. And when you said, is this really a thing? And nobody's talking about it. And that's exactly my point. People aren't talking about it. There's a lot of shame involved. And when I first started talking about this, I was like, oh, hell no, this is not going to be my thing. This is not my message, but it wouldn't go away. There's a lot of shame and there's a lot of confusion because for me, I thought, well, was I sexually abused? Maybe it's just curiosity. Who am I to be messed up over it?
Let me ask you a question about that, because that's the way my brain works. So you just mentioned, obviously, you know, Chicken and I, you know, talk a lot about the, you know, the reality of pornography. You know, I mean, I remember when I was young and I was like, I guess we'll just use the word curious, you know. And, you know, it's interesting for me to even just go back, like, as far as I know, I was never abused. But what's interesting is when you meet somebody that kind of like unconsciously was abused, and almost sometimes we find out later we were abused.
Yeah.
I can say that it's still scary to even curiously look and see if I was. You know, I don't know if anybody can relate to that, but I think that a lot of what happens to us as children, we kind of just want to leave it in the past.
Yes.
But you mentioned this idea of, in this new reality, you know, adults and kids have access. I mean, we've got an 11-year-old daughter. I've got a 16-year-old and an 18-year-old. Like, the truth is, like, I can do the best job that I can, but who the hell knows what they're doing? Because my 11-year-old knows more about the internet than me. But what you said is they'll see something and it'll trigger something in them. And it's a natural progression for a kid, a teenager, to want to like experience it and see what it is.
Yeah.
Now, I would assume that some kids will go and be alone with themselves. But what you're saying is that in some cases, and I dare I say it's because it's such a tragic thing to think about, but it does carry some sort of unconscious innocence in like, hey, I want to try this out.
It does.
So is that
absolutely does.
So here's that being said, somebody that's been through what you've been through, because there's another side to this. Somebody might be listening to this that is now considered the abuser, right? Feeling really, really bad and hoping, wishing and praying that it never happened because they were a kid and they think that I didn't know what I was doing. Get into that a little bit, like, because I would assume that you've looked at both sides and in some way, shape, or form made sense of it. And by the way, I'm not saying that any of this is okay. That's just the way my brain works. I see a lot of things at play here.
No, those are great questions. Absolutely great questions, Dragon. And I'm very mindful because I am a moderator of a Facebook group and I see people who are in great amounts of pain. And I was there. I was at the bottom. I was a victim and I was angry and I was angry at the world. So I'm very mindful of where I was and where I am now. My particular situation, I've actually been able to speak to my brother, who was my abuser. It's a unique situation. And I was able to ask him, I said, why did you do that? Were you sexually abused? What was going on in your head? And it truly started with curiosity. He was curious and his body reacted the way it's programmed to react, and his body wanted more. Now, when someone sexually abuses a child, say children who are 10 to 14, particularly males, it's a critical age of education and talking to them. So it's a critical age. They are curious. They want to explore. They're pushing the boundaries. And I was available. And so it's so critical that we give them sex education and make sure that the door is open. They also aren't operating from an adult perspective. He wasn't 18. He wasn't 20. So he's not a Jeffrey Epstein. He was a 12-year-old kid. But he still knew right from wrong. He did. So there's that fine line. I'm in a position where I've been able to forgive. And I'm not going to tell everybody they have to forgive. It worked for me. But that's where I'm at with it. So you do know what you're doing, but you also know right from wrong, but you're also human. So I think it's very dependent on the survivor of what they went through. I know where I'm at with it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it's so fascinating. And it's interesting. I'm finding myself in this conversation and catching myself with curious questions, and I have to be very sensitive to it. I probably will have another conversation with you that's not being recorded, but it's just fascinating as a parent, because anytime my children do something that is like just really stupid, first of all, it's stupid in my eyes and in the eyes of society. Like, even if my kid like is mean to another kid or something like that. But what we have to remind ourselves as parents, good parents, is that, my daughter's only 11. You know what I
Right.
mean? And you brought up an interesting thing about, and this is probably where a lot of the work needs to be done, is this concept of children knowing what's right and wrong, but teaching them how to respond and act appropriately in it. Because, like you said, curiosity is what's at play here. I mean, if I really allowed my my deep thoughts to come out of my head, or anybody listening right now allowed their, what we call their dark passenger, to speak, we'd probably all be in jail, because
Right.
everybody has these ideas, but it's just different. Some people act on them and some don't. Okay. So first of all, some thoughts. You mentioned that as a result of that experience that you became numb. What's interesting is numb to me is another way of saying unconscious, erase it. Like, so it sounds like, because as we look at moving forward, because you're ahead of most people that are just awakening to this right now and haven't dealt with it.
Right.
So just know that Jane is a great advocate if somebody resonates with any of this and wants to have a private conversation. That's what where her heart is. She's not even doing it for the money or anything like that. She's just like one of those legit angels from heaven that's trying to save the world. Right? And I'm going to talk to her, because she needs to have a business plan. But it's a self-worth thing, that builds up, that potentially dismantles people's ability to function in the world. But going back to experiencing what you did, or for that matter, anybody that experiences trauma, did it get to a place where you felt like it was normal? Did you get conditioned to think that that's just what it is?
The sexual abuse.
That and whatever else was going on. Yeah. I mean, did you begin to accept it? Because it sounds like you not only accepted it, but you moved to this other phase where when it went away, you craved it.
Yes. So I didn't feel like I was being sexually abused. He never hurt me. He never threatened me. I was confused because I was 6 and I thought, what's going on? I felt like a science project. But at some point, my body started responding. And in my trauma brain, I said I was a willing participant. And I didn't have the words to tell. And what I have told, I don't know. So it was very normal to me. And then growing up, I thought that doesn't happen very often. That was just weirdness in my family. And I started Googling sibling sexual abuse, and it was very silent. But there were a few articles that said it was so rampant because there's so much shame. So that's when I started speaking out, because I thought, I'm not the only 6-year-old girl, and he's not the only 12-year-old boy. We're not alone. There's millions of us out there.
Yeah. And what comes to my mind, that, I mean, I could in a very, very meager way see how I've kind of known that something happened that I needed to speak about, because a lot of my angst and anxiety in life came from some sort of trauma. It could be just my dad leaving home or something like that. And I don't want to compare that to what you've been through.
There's no comparison. Everybody's got their own reality.
Well,
I do want to say that. And
I thank you for that.
Yeah, that's everybody's reality. So.
But one of the things about it is when you think about, because there's a therapeutic value and, just talk therapy and getting it out so you can finally move on. But one of the things about it is it's exhausting to think about voicing something that society portrays is going to be like, hey, keep it quiet. Don't talk about it in church, or whatever it is. So I first of all, I want to acknowledge how brave it is to be able to speak about this stuff. Like, somebody else might listen to this podcast and be, and honestly in their head think like, oh, she's just bitching, quit your bitching, right? There's another version of the way the human brain, that's how they'll quiet down something that they know is. But I just want to commend you for having the strength to take that on, and probably the abuse that you get, or because it's a controversial conversation. I've got somebody that I want to introduce you to that is just amazing that talks about this topic as well.
Great.
So,
I appreciate that.
yeah. So the idea, back to the stripper component of it, what was interesting to me is you started to build up probably a lack of self-worth and confidence, which you might have like inherently found while you were getting attention. But then when it went away, was part of you being a stripper, was it part of you was probably the attention, but also control? Was that what that was about?
I do think a lot of it was control. And I will state that if anybody is thinking that the strippers want their man, no. I just wanted the control. I wanted to see if I could get their man and get his money. True confession.
So fascinating. So yeah, sorry guys, yeah, and also girls. But just carpet statement. That's, who knows, there's so many diverse things going on.
Yes, absolutely.
There could
Everybody's
be
different.
There could be a stripper out there trying to get your man,
And I did get one. I did find one on the stage. So it can happen.
So as we move forward, what I'm really, really interested in here is how these things can have an impact on your ability to make decisions and move forward in life. So, because, some other things happen, some other things unfolded. You met this man and then, probably saw a light at the end of the tunnel, and you're constantly seeing things that you perceive were going to be good for you. A lot of them ended up down the road. You can look back and say that wasn't good for me, to have that happen to me, to be a stripper. And so you're constantly experiencing obstacles and loss. What did that do to your ability prior to who you are today as a goal setter and a goal getter? I mean, did you become somebody that could say, I'm going to do this and execute it? Or did you start noticing that you had self-worth issues?
That's a great, deep question.
Yeah, Dragon goes deep.
I know you do. I know you do. And I appreciate that. I can start with a story. It was about 10 or 11 years ago, and it was a Thanksgiving dinner. And my mother-in-law brought out this journal, and she said, we're going to start a new tradition. I want everybody to write down something they're thankful for. And everybody's posting on Facebook and Instagram all their pictures and how grateful they are. And I thought, I have nothing to be grateful for. This is stupid. I was that low. And I started reading a book. I think it's called The 1,000 Gifts, and it talks about gratitude. So this was 10 or 11 years ago. And I just started being grateful for the smell of brownies, green grass. I started small. So when you do find gratitude in things, it does work. It does change your brain around. And something else that also happened was I would blame my husband, this husband, for all my problems. It was his fault. He was the reason I was angry. He was the reason I couldn't move forward. And someone said, start being grateful for your husband. Start being grateful for your marriage. And I thought, I can't even get the words out. But I started it. And you know what? I'm grateful for him. And I'm grateful that he stuck it out with me, because I was hard on him. I tried to make him go away multiple times. I tried to sabotage the marriage. So for me, the way I've been able to get here, what's worked for me is, all honesty, shedding my layers. That's how I describe it. I had to shed my layers of shame. I had to shed my story. And that started by writing it down and looking at it and thinking, oh my gosh, I went through that. That's a lot. And then starting to verbalize it and share it with my husband, because my husband didn't know. And when you're not known and when you're carrying all this inside of you, it's heavy, it's dark. And we all, as humans, we can all relate. We want to be known. We all have something in there that we're fearful of. If that person only knew, they wouldn't accept me. And that, I think that made me numb. That made me unconscious. So shedding those layers, that has been my biggest healer.
Yeah, I love so much about that. One of the observations that I made when I meet somebody that's like super unhealthy, physically or mentally. Like when I meet a really mean person, um, when I come across somebody that like attacks me for no reason, or just somebody that's out there taking a stand for something that doesn't really exist. Um, I don't think anybody ever wakes up in the morning and makes a conscious decision to be unhealthy. I don't think anybody says, today my goal is to hurt people, right?
Right.
So I think that that there's this constant battle that human beings have to unveil consciousness versus unconsciousness. Um, because you can get them mixed up. You can actually unconsciously think you're conscious and consciously think you're unconscious. It's a very, it's a very, very challenging thing for people to do. But people that have experienced trauma, because remember, whatever it is that I came up with a formula the other day, and because I've got some interesting rise ups coming up. And what it is like whatever you consume with regularity plus time equals your reality, right? Whatever you consume and whatever happens over time equals your reality. So it's interesting to look at people that have experienced like legit trauma, not just like my daddy left me, but like, there's some crazy stories out there.
Yeah.
It makes sense that had a big part in programming their minds, and that impacts, because I work with people and I teach people how to create a more efficient, effective response system to stuff. Like, the fact that you somehow came to the conclusion that you were blaming your husband, who is like a saint, for stuff that happened to you a long time ago. It makes sense, because the first thing that we do when we feel unsettled is we have to take it off our hands and give it to somebody else. Not my fault. But you've gained this ability, once again, just a compliment, because unfortunately a lot of people will die before they let their song out.
Right.
You've somehow gained this ability to answer the question, where am I right now? And say, oh, wait a second. I'm unconsciously thinking my husband has something to do with this, just because he loved me so much and he's the only one around. So fascinating. So this is another question that is, really, really coming to my mind right now. And I want to go back to something. This idea of the 12-year-old brother, right?
Yes.
Because a big part of this is forgiveness. And I just want to, I want to make a statement, because when somebody's like really fired up about something that happened to them, they very often say, I can never forgive them for what they did. And I always say, that's not what I'm saying forgiveness is. Forgiveness, in my mind, means, because I've had to forgive some people that have done some really screwed up stuff, right? What I think forgiveness is saying, I no longer am allowing this to impact my life. I'm going to move forward. I'm going to let it go. So I forgive you. I'm letting you and what happened off, right? I'm not carrying it with me anymore. So going back to that 12-year-old who kind of knows what's right and wrong. Like if you ask a 12-year-old, was that a good idea or a bad idea, a good choice or a bad choice? They'll kind of go like, I remember my kids at 12, like, hey, when you lit that broom on fire and handed it to your brother and ran away, like, was that a good idea or a bad idea? And then they kind of go like, yeah, that was a bad idea, Dad. But here we are as adults making mistakes all the time, quote unquote, putting our feet in our mouth and all that stuff. And once we recognize the fact that like we forgive ourselves, and so does the church, for we know not what we do. The question is when a 12-year-old does something like that, how conscious are they? They might know it's right or wrong, but do kids have the ability to know how their actions impact others' lives? That's what's fascinating to me, because that's where the unconscious element is. Because it's one thing to know if something's right or wrong, but it's another to know what the ramifications are of it.
Right. I would love to speak to that if you don't mind.
Yeah, go for it.
Because I have a a speaking relationship with my brother. It's not like I have him over for dinner but I've had to process that. When I was 21, he had his first child, and I went to go see the child. And he said to me, "I'm really sorry for what I did to you as a kid." And I thought, "What did you do to me as a kid?" And I thought, "Oh, no, no." And then I said, "It's okay. I participated." And so then I took that memory, I took that apology, and I put it away. But I'm going to say that I had that apology in my back pocket for the next 25 years. On some level, I knew, okay, he apologized for what he did. He knows what he did. But then I had to go through the anger, and I pushed him away. And the way, I mean, this is going to lead into forgiveness, but it's also going to go back to him. The way forgiveness worked out for me was I was 45 years old. I was laying on a massage table, and the male masseuse, pushed the limits, and I froze. I did not know what to do. And I left that appointment feeling shameful, feeling embarrassed, and feeling at fault. And as I drove away, I thought, wait a second, I'm 45 years old and I didn't know what to do, and I froze. How was that 6-year-old to know what to do? And so it was at that point where I forgave that 6-year-old, because I did not like that 6-year-old. She kept knocking on my door and looking at me. I'm like, what do you want from me? You let that happen. So I forgave her first, and then I forgave myself. And that's when I was able to forgive him. And through forgiving him, I wrote him a letter of forgiveness, and he was shocked. He said to me, I said I was sorry, and I thought it was over. I had no idea that it was still there and that it caused all this.
That is so rock solid. Like, I didn't even know that you were going to say that, because, whenever I speak to somebody about forgiveness, I always have to be careful.
Yes.
Because you and I have just met, and we obviously get along and we have good conversation, but it's very interesting to just stop every now and then and say, I wonder what her limits are. But if you really think about it, whenever we get angry about something that happened to us, unconsciously, a lot of that is being angry at ourselves for letting it happen. And what were you, 6 years old, you said?
Yes.
Yeah. So the idea of going back and saying, you were 6, I mean, that's a big part of the healing process. And I think that somebody listening to this is going to be a popular episode. And I'm probably going to get a lot of secret messages about this, good and bad. Bring them on.
Good and bad.
But that's a big part of it. Now, somebody that is very, very, very much taking a stance as a victim, right? And all they can see is that they were wronged. That's going to be a tough thing for them to do, is to forgive themselves in it. So you are operating on a different, like on Planet Jane.
Yes.
Like, we think about things before we say them. So that's awesome. One thing I want to pull back something. Suicide is huge right now.
Yeah, it is.
More than ever. And to the point where there's a perception that it's an option, right? And, it was a great option for you, makes total sense. And, in my story, I've been through that darkness as well. But unfortunately, we've gotten to this point with everything that's going on in the world where suicide is an option. You made an observation that is really, really cool. And I don't even know if you know the difference, but I've always thought it's one thing to want to kill yourself. It's another to pray that God creates some sort of an act that takes care of it for you.
I agree.
And when you said that, I said, man, that could be really helpful to somebody that's in the dark right now. Because a big part, there's a lot of shame involved in you thinking that you want to do that to yourself and all that stuff. But I think more often than not, that's not what's going on. And when you're in this position where you're just saying, please, God, you're almost saying, fix this, or just turn the lights out, make it go away, God, right? Or universe, or whatever it is that you pray to. That person is right there on the line of of having an awakening, which in my book, it's called a snap, where all of a sudden, boop, everything comes into clarity, which could be like the act of forgiving yourself or something like that. So I want to thank you for sharing that. And I wanted to clarify that for somebody that's listening, because I know what it's
Yeah.
like.
And I will say that I've met so many people that have been there in that position of wanting to die, but not suicidal. So I think so many people experience that. I just want that out there that you're not alone.
Yeah. I've been at some family events that were just so traumatic that I wanted to leave. Right. But I didn't want to die. I mean, like
Yeah.
I very often say, hey, this movie sucks. Let's get out of here. I do want to make a comment, just because Chicken and I, whenever we go on trips and everything like that, we got a lot of travel coming up, going to Aruba, going to Colorado to speak with, Tim Story and Sharon Lecter. Got a lot of fun stuff coming up. And then we're going back to South Africa. But last night we saw a spectacular movie, and I want to give it a shout out. It's kind of weird to go to like a movie. Like I thought maybe when you go to the movie theater, you're like, what's playing? Like Fast Times at Ridgemont High, like there's new movies coming out right now. And there's a new movie by M. Night Shyamalan called Old. And it is, I just want to throw it out there. If you guys like thrillers that make you think, that have like a crazy twisted ending, go see Old. Okay. So let me phase place where people are potentially at. So somebody listens to this and they resonate with it in their own way, whether it's spousal sexual abuse or childhood sexual abuse or some sort of trauma. And they're kind of like in this place where they're in between thinking that it happened to them. They don't know if they can move forward, but there's a space there. There's like a window of opportunity to make a decision that they're screwed or there's a light at the end of the tunnel. What's your advice to those people?
Right. And I'm only going to share what worked for me, and you can take what works for you and what doesn't work for you. Because I feel like I kind of stumbled on my healing. I feel like I've been very, very fortunate. What worked for me was to start writing it down. And it's very painful. It's hard to write. So even just 3 minutes a day, just writing it down. And I literally felt like there was something inside of me that had to get out, or I was going to die inside. And I was dying inside. So I started writing it down. And then I started sharing it with my husband. And I started writing it to him first. I could say I could write it, but I can't speak it. And I could get it to him. And I would say, don't ask me any questions. I'm not prepared to talk. You got to understand, I've been talking about this now in public for 4 or 5 years. It wasn't easy at first. It was terrifying. I could barely say the words. I could say my brother messed with me. So it's a process. So those are the two things that worked for me. And I'm not going to tell you have to forgive. I believe that forgiveness can look like many different things for many different people. So taking those layers off, that's the best way I can describe it for me. And finding someone who can hear your story and listen and not fix and not tell you you have to forgive, because I was told all the time, you have to forgive, you have to forgive. And I said, I don't have to do anything. So find a safe place where someone can listen, just listen and be with you and not try and fix you or tell you to get over it. That's my best solution for me. That's what worked for me.
Yeah. I mean, we all tell people what they have to do. And for those of you that are having people, I've haved people most of my life too. And the reason why we do that is because, when we take on the role of the hero, it's an unconscious effort to validate ourselves.
Yes.
And feel like we're helpful. But if you step back and say, before you do it, what you'll see is that, this person might need just like a simple first step of just being heard, or taking out a pen and writing their name down, or just some sort of thing that, I'm speaking to the person that looks around and finds himself in a hole with no way out.
Right.
One of the first things that I've noticed anytime that I'm in a hole with no way out is that unconsciously I'm digging the hole deeper. Right?
Yes.
So that might be a first step, is to like say, stop the hole. But then start recognizing the things that you are in control of and the things that you're not. You're not in control of what happened. You're not in control of what's going to happen, but you are in control of something as simple as Jane said, of writing something down or, reaching out to a friend. Stay within the realm. I always call this control freak. Be a control freak. It's totally fine. Stay in control by doing things that are in your control. It's when we think about and try to control uncontrollable things, like, if somebody's experienced trauma, and I'm sure you have, it there's a little bit of this where they keep going back to the event and with hopes that it'll change. One of the greatest gifts that anybody can give themselves is to stop trying to create a better past.
Yeah.
Isn't that interesting? So, Jane, love this conversation, and love the idea of being your friend and learning more. I've got some questions that probably are not appropriate for live, so we'll continue our relationship. But if somebody wants to reach out to you, because that's what you do now, you put yourself there for people as an advocate. Explain what you do for people now and how they can reach you.
Great. There is one thing I would like to say to something you just said. When I started owning my story and saying, okay, this is my story, and I quit trying to outrun it or quit trying to live in it. When I said, okay, this is my story, I own it. That's also when some healing began. So I do want to share that as well. So what I do now, I didn't mean for this to happen. I never thought I'd be out here publicly talking about sibling sexual abuse. It just started wanting to bring awareness to it. And I started speaking about it. And people were reaching out to me saying, thank you, that happened to me. Nobody's talking about it. They would do private messages. So my page is very quiet. And then I started getting messages from parents saying, this just happened in our family. We had no idea that this was a thing. We thought our kids were safe. And so I know that this is a silent epidemic, and I have other advocates out there working with me, and we are trying to bring about awareness because prevention is key. If we educate our children starting at age 3, and if we check in with our teens and start educating them and talking to them, we can lessen the numbers. I firmly believe that. So I am not a therapist. I am not a coach. I am an advocate. I am out there trying to create a platform for child sexual abuse survivors. And you can reach me on my website, which is complicatedcourage.com, or on Instagram. You can message me. It's Jane_complicatedcourage. Any place you Google Jane and Complicated Courage, you will find me. I've got a Facebook page on Complicated Courage. It's pretty quiet because, like I said, people don't want to comment publicly, but that's where you can find me. And I've got resources on my website, and I can find you a Facebook group. And if I don't have the resources, I can find someone that does have the resources.
Awesome. Love that. One last question. Just coming to mind. So you're a parent and
Yes.
You've got 2 kids.
Boys.
Well, I'm not referring to you. I'm just referring to somebody.
Okay.
So as a parent, there's a parent out there and they've got 2 kids, 3 kids, and they see something that, after hearing something like this, that doesn't look right. And they're ashamed of it and they're hoping it's going to go away or anything like that. So speaking to a parent, what would be the right way for a parent to address something that they see?
Thank you for asking this question. If you're a parent and you suspect something is going on, or if you walk in on something and something may be happening, I ask you to take a deep breath, remain calm. And as parents, we always say every experience is a learning experience, right? That's another learning experience. Talk to your kids with open-ended questions, no judgment. Ask them, so what were you doing and why were you doing it? And that can create a dialogue, and you can figure out if somebody's being sexually abused or if it's curiosity. And if it's either way, you can stop the behavior and you can explain to them, well, this is a great opportunity to talk about body safety. We don't touch other people's parts. That includes siblings, step-siblings, cousins, friends, neighbors. Open that dialogue. And if your children are young and you're opening that dialogue, keep that dialogue open, because when you have teenagers, you need that dialogue. And then I do have some books on my website that I recommend. And I've read almost all of those books, and my children have had all those books read to them. There's one, 30 Days of Sex Talks, that I highly recommend. My kids would disagree because they hated the calendar invite for sex talks, but that's what I recommend. And if it's already happened in your home, or if you suspect that it's happening in your home, you're not alone. Just know that, and if you try and hide it and shove it under the rug, then the abuse will continue, and the healing process will take longer. So please get your family help and get them therapy. And I have websites that I can direct you to.
Awesome. This is awesome. One quick little insight, and Chicken, Chicken's my wife.
Yes.
Chicken's getting her, she's going to be a psychologist. She's very, very passionate about mental health, but she's also a licensed sex coach. So she's very, very, and people probably, when they hear that, they go, "Ooh, that sounds sexy." Not what you think. But what's interesting about that is we're very open and passionate about allowing the conversation of learning about sex, at the appropriate age with our children. But we all know that kids are like, I don't want to talk about that. But that shows you what society is doing. And the problem with that, and it's just a little statement before we close, is that because we make kids think that that is not something to talk about, therein lies the potential reason that they won't when something screwed up happens, because we're teaching them to be ashamed of that stuff.
Yeah.
So this conversation has brought up a lot of light. Now, Jane and I have this kind of like little secret competition going because we both found out about this book. This is not Jane's book. It actually has nothing to do with our conversation. But I just want to show you, Jane, that I have the next book that Dragon's reading. So it'll be done by the end of the week. Is Emotional Agility, and I can't wait to read it. And I wouldn't know about this book if I didn't have that moment where Jane and I met. So Jane, thank you so much for being with us. You're really opening up a conversation, because I didn't experience anything like you did, but in this conversation, I'm still welcome to go back and see some other things that I might have packed away that I could further work on and free myself from. So thank you so much for your transparency, for your story. And, I see you doing a lot of great things for this somewhat screwed up world that has a lot of hope for the future. So thanks for being with us.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you so much, Dragon. Thank you.
Awesome. So we're going to take it out with my homemade outro. This will be edited and be a podcast at Rise Up with Dragon on iTunes. You can follow me on Instagram at Rise Up with Dragon. We'll probably put some little snackables of this and Jane for you to revisit it. Go check out Jane at complicatedcourage.com. And remember, you can follow me on Clubhouse at Makes Sense. Love and appreciate you all. Have an amazing day.